glad you're here. There ought to be things that people like you could do with a nice night like this, but instead you're here, which means that you are interested in the history of your county and in World War I soldiers who endured, I think, the worst war this country has ever engaged in. Well, my English teacher would kill me for any descendants of the preposition. I can hear them coming on. Sometimes I change. That one slipped by me. Anyway, let me call your attention to some things on this table. What you're about to hear is part of volume 13 of a series called Heritage of the Toe River Valley. And if you've not seen these, there's actually a copy over here that belongs to Rhonda. Well, I'm going to buy it from her because it's the last one, so don't love it so much. You'll take it with you. Volume 13 is about World War I and its soldiers. I've written about 800 pages of manuscript about the war itself. And then I decided to do little sketches of the soldiers. In the first of 3 drafts, more than 900 people were drafted from the Toe River Valley. More than 700 of them passed the physical. And I thought at first I would do sketches of all of them, but they're very hard to do. If I have nothing to bother me from 8 in the morning until midnight, I might get 2 soldiers done. Otherwise, maybe 1. So in those 2 notebooks, there are sketches of 400 of them. The first page or 2 is an index. So you can look and see if one of your relatives is described in there, and look and see how many errors I made. I've done as well as I could. About 300 of them have photographs. Okay, let's get underway with a little chat called World War I in the Toe River Valley. Beginning in the year 1914, a form of madness seized the leaders of all the European countries. It was a madness that did not care for human life, as you will see. It involved personal ego and national pride. Even when one of the major combatants wanted to quit after 4 years, the ruler of Germany decided he would attack him if he did so. That's the kind of ego that was involved. This madness had been going on for several years. When it was over, 4 years later, 16 million soldiers and civilians were dead. Add to that 20 million more who had been wounded, and the result is an estimated total of 36 million casualties. Think of that, 36 million. That is more than the present population of all of Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and part of Alabama. More American troops died in one period of less than 6 months than were lost in an entire decade of the war in Vietnam. And this struggle had some new innovations. It was the first use of trench warfare, tanks, poison gas, aircraft, flamethrowers, and cannon of unheard of power. And when it was over some villages, nothing was left, and here are 2 contemporary shots showing what happened to villages. So does my son find the correct button? This is a village called Law, L-E-N-S. You know the French pronounce things funny ways. So L-E-N-S is Law. There's another one. The sign that says, I'll pronounce it in English, this was Fortis. Total destruction. This was likely the greatest catastrophe that had yet befallen the Western world. More people died here than died of bubonic plague, that dreaded Black Death in the Middle Ages. The toll from it was an estimated near 25 million, about 65% of the entire population of Europe. Only World War II, which spread beyond Europe to a totally worldwide conflagration, exceeded this 1914 realm of death and destruction. Here is just one little piece, one more view of the magnitude of the horror. Can you guess what that is? There was a famous battle at Verdun. If you watch the peanut strip, you'll find that the dog Snoopy often pretends he's a World War I soldier on his way to Verdun. After that horrible battle, the remains of soldiers were scraped up. These are all skeletons. You can see in a place or two rib cages. As for the United States, some 4 million soldiers were involved, leading to an estimated 276,000 deaths from wounds and disease. The state of North Carolina contributed more than 86,000 troops, 629 killed, and 3,800 more were wounded. Returning soldiers brought with them the Spanish flu. That killed many of them when they were in the ranks, but they brought it back to their hometown, and this resulted in the death of millions more. Soldiers on all sides believed and were told by their leaders that this conflict would be very brief, perhaps a month or two. It would be a grand and glorious adventure. Little did they realize that it would last for another 4 years and would be filled with unimaginable horrors. In retrospect, I think the conflict was in many ways worse than World War II. This madness was first referred to as the Great War, and some first referred to it optimistically as the war to end all wars, and they thought it would enter into a realm of peace that would last for a very long time. In our own day in the Clover Valley, the war has become a faded memory. All the veterans have gone to rest. Their accounts of the war are being forgotten. And most of them would not talk about it because the Army told them, do not write in letters, do not send pictures of the conflict. It will be too upsetting. And they were forbidden to keep a diary. I have found people who participate and kept diaries and reproduced them in this book. So of the hundreds of families that I have contacted and asked them, what did grandfather say about the war? They say, we wouldn't talk about it. And that is a great pity. And their descendants know absolutely nothing and seem not to care. Here is how one North Carolinian summed up this war. Quote, we always said that the ones to die early were the lucky ones, because they didn't have to go through what we did. And you will see the reality of which he speaks. Here are some photos of soldiers after a battle. These are North Carolinians in a deep trench, dead and fallen over each other. Not a very clear photograph, but it's the best I can do. I suspect that these were victims of poison gas. And another of French soldiers. Such a mass attack could only be a cannon or again gas. So no wonder that I've had so much trouble gathering information about what local soldiers endured in the Great War. And I'm sadly remembered of a poem by Avery Masters. I can scarcely read this thing without getting choked up, but I will try to get through it without it this time. Avery Masters, an anthology called Spoon River. Where are Elmer, Herman, Bert, Tom, and Bill? All are sleeping, sleeping, sleeping on the hill. They brought them dead sons from the war, and daughters whom life had crushed, and their children fatherless crying. All are sleeping, sleeping, sleeping on the hill. So what I've been trying to do for some 2 years now is to preserve what little remains of their story. And so far it totals about 800 pages of description, plus the work of the sketches of soldiers. So let's see if we can figure what happened with the aid of a map. As soon as my son came to me. Here is what Europe looked like in 1914 at the start of the Great Conflict. On the one side were the so-called Central Powers, shown here in pink. It consisted of Germany and its neighbor, which was a combination of Britain, Austria, and Hungary. Opposing them on the other side were the so-called Allies, shown in tan, primarily England, France, and, far to the east, Russia. First, let's look to the west, to the left of the map, and see what the situation was. In the mid-1800s, there was a strong desire of various local groups, there were many of them, little Germanic states, to unite. And the hope was that this larger union would replace France as the dominant power in Europe. That led to the so-called Franco-Prussian War. It was a work of German ego, German pride, and nationalism. The Franco-German War happened in the 1870s, and one result was that part of France, very valuable coal-bearing region, was seized by Germany. And the French never gave up the hope of winning it back. Then let's look to the east, to the right on the map. Here in 1908, Austria-Hungary and its German ally had annexed a small area to the south called Bosnia. Bosnia, I don't think is shown on the map. It's part of Serbia, as you can see. But you'll remember that 10 years or so ago, Bosnia played a great role in a war at the time of President Bill Clinton. Now, the people of Bosnia were Slavic. You see Serbia down there? They're Slavic. And that population was more akin to the people of Serbia and Russia than they were the Germans. This caused a lot of local unrest, and they hoped that they could break away from the Austrians and be reunited with Serbia. Well, the Trigger event happened June the 14th, or the June the 28th, I think, 1914, when the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne was visiting Bosnia with his wife Sophia and waiting for them for assassins. Here is a newspaper account the next day. And an assassin shot the royal couple dead. Well, the Austrian government, the hometown of this affair, responded with a certain demand upon Serbia for punishment. Serbia rejected some of the terms and began to mobilize its army. And Austria-Hungary, eager for the opportunity to solve its Serbian problem, once and for all declared war on Serbia. Then a series of interlocking alliances came into play. People had been expecting war for generations, and there were alliances between all the major powers. And so many of the countries were already itching for an excuse to enlarge their boundaries and settle old scores. So the fat was in the fire very quickly. Germany, unfortunately, now faced a war on two fronts. This may sound familiar to you from World War II, where the same situation applied. Germany was fighting, look up to the previous slide, please. Germany is now going to have to fight France and England to the west and left, and Russia to the right, thus dividing and diminishing the power of its army. Now, one of the curious things about this great war is that all the major leaders of these countries were cousins, first cousins. In a sense, it was a family feud among the descendants of England's Queen Victoria. She's sometimes called the grandmother of Europe. One of the first cousins is really the war's bad boy, the German leader called the Kaiser. His name was Wilhelm in English, William, and hence he came to be known as Kaiser Wilhelm. His grandmother, Queen Victoria, said of him, quote, "He is a hot-headed, conceited, and wrong-headed young man." And this was the cause of death of millions. Now, things must be described in only the briefest terms. I'll see if I can summarize the first 2 years of the war in one paragraph. Germany, with a massive and modernized army, whereas her opponents were not, quickly advanced through France. But then slowly they were driven back to the borders of Belgium with heavy losses of life. How's that for a quick summary of 200 years? There, the Germans established a line of defensive trenches that could be well defended with machine guns. And facing them, the advancing British similarly dug in, as did the French farther south. And when either side tried to advance to those trenches, which was called going over the top, Losses were massive from machine gun fire, and little territory could be gained. Now originally, the trenches were 3 on either side. So if you were lucky enough to overrun the first one, there was a second, a few hundred yards later, and then a third one. See, I've already talked myself into the need for elevation. And the killing fields in between were separated by barbed wire and machine gun nests and pounded by artillery. It was so effective that the area in between the trenches came to be called no man's land. And many hundreds of thousands of troops lost their life on each side when their officers foolishly ordered them over the top to attack the trenches on the other side. And so a bloody stalemate developed that lasted for 2 years. Here is a typical trench built by the Germans. These things were 8 to 10 feet deep. Sometimes wicker, as shown here, held the bulks in place, sometimes timber, sometimes just clay. There were sandbags atop the bulk facing the enemy, where a soldier could look over and peer at the enemy, and sometimes took a bullet in the head as a device of his curiosity. When an incoming artillery shell struck one of these trenches, fragments of metal and splinters of wood scattered in all directions, sometimes with absolutely deadly force. How did you skip in these things? Well, you cut a cubby hole in the side in the bulk of the trench, and you tossed in there some hay if you were lucky, or some dry grass, and there you slept. What happened when it rained is horrible to imagine. These trenches sometimes stretched for miles, and water would run through them just like a stream, sometimes knee, sometimes deeper. Here's an illustration of a British soldier in the corner of one of the trenches. How'd you like to dig a net for a month or 2? So soldiers sometimes had to fight, eat, and sleep, containing soupy mud and sewage, because the water carried along feces and debris. There was nothing you could do about it. Incoming artillery shells killed soldiers, mangled their corpses, and sometimes the only means of disposal was buried in the mud. Then they decomposed and created terrifying stench, and all of the soldiers constantly smoked cigarettes in order to mask the smell. Then there would be more incoming artillery, and it would hurl parts of those rotting soldiers back to the surface. Here's a description by a soldier in the 81st Division, where most of Mitchell County's soldiers served. Quote, "The worst of all is the men lying that have never been buried. You can hardly step without stepping on skeletons and graves. The shells have blown some of the men that had been buried back out of the ground. You could walk along the trenches and see their guts sticking out of the edge of the trench." Unquote. Soldiers were constantly attacked by body lice, commonly called at the time cooties, and still are, and scabies, commonly called the itch. And at night, rats crawled everywhere over them, finding what food they could, and sometimes trying to gnaw the faces of the soldiers. Another great horror of the trenches was body lice. They were everywhere. They crawled just like a mat on your body. And you could be rid of them occasionally because the Army brought in a delousing tank. I think I have a slide of that Avery can show you. And the soldiers said that the delousing tank always arrived at the worst time, when the weather was coldest and wettest. And you stripped down to your sleeves and more than that, and boiled your clothing in that big tank. It did little good because you put on your clean uniform. Back you went into your cubby and the straw that was filled with lice. One soldier, a North Carolinian, I think, had a louse really giving him trouble in the back of his neck. And he bent forward to grab it. And when he bent forward, a rifle shell passed right through his head. Would have blown his head off. And he looked at the louse that he had not yet squished and said, "Oh, buddy, you saved my life." And he put it back. The wounded, if they could not be gotten quickly to adequate medical attention in the back trench, often were afflicted with gangrene, we now call it blood poison, that led to amputation or death. And other soldiers were so traumatized that they were helpless with trembling and paralysis. A German soldier in his diary describes trench life like this, quote, "It looked like a butcher's bench. Even though the dead had been removed, there was blood and brains and scraps of flesh everywhere, and flies were gathering on them." Unquote. Perhaps the most dreaded weapon of this war was so-called poison gas, chemical agents. The first one was chlorine. You can see the stuff, it's pale green. I can vividly remember being in chemistry lab, and this monkey down at the far end, I don't know what he did, but I saw this pea green mist come flooding up out of his sink. You better believe I hit him from the exit as quickly as possible. The stuff burned your lungs from within. It made them exude fluid, and you literally drowned from inside. It killed thousands of troops. It would darken the sky for hours. And pretty soon all sides were using it frequently. But the Germans discovered a new way to use it. They added an oil to it that now made it sort of mustard yellow. It was called mustard gas. And rather than blowing it across the trenches or any wind blowing it away, it was heavy. And when it came to the trench, down it settled. And it adhered to the surface. Anything you touched, it was on your hands or your body. And if you advanced to a new trench, maybe taken from the Germans, it might have had mustard gas in its vicinity. You didn't realize it, and pretty soon you had the stuff all over you, and it blinded you. And even the soldiers who survived it, they had bronchial infections from the rest of their life. And many ultimately died from it and from pneumonia. The Americans at first did not have gas masks. The Germans developed them, and they used them not only for soldiers, but for animals. And I think I have a couple of shots of that. Here are German soldiers advancing out of a fog of poison gas, wearing masks, coming at you with bayonets. And here's what happens sometimes if you had dogs or horses. The animal is fitted with a gas mask. So this stuff, mustard gas, could live for weeks. Sometimes it took 24 to 48 hours to reach its full effect. And blindness is not only through death, but disability in blindness. In one 10-day period, it's reported that the Germans released 1 million canisters containing 2,500 tons of mustard. Overall, gases entered 1 million soldiers and civilians and killed hundreds of thousands. In February through December of 1916, the war is now 2 years old, the Germans mounted an attack on French forces at Verdun. Remember that mound of skeletons from a few minutes ago? That was opening a road to Paris. 1 million artillery shells pummeled the French defenders at Verdun. 1 million within hours. And then the Germans advanced with flamethrowers and broke through the line of resistance. They then encountered very stiff resistance, since the French had been ordered to save Verdun at all costs. And the defenders of the trenches were forced to drink urine. Bombardment was constant. They had diarrhea. They could not get to the latrine trenches to the rear. If they had paper, they tried to catch diarrhea in the paper and hurl it over the trenches. Many of them did not have it. They tried to catch it with their hands and hurl it out of the trench. You can imagine the problem that caused, especially if anybody had the Spanish flu. Each side fired an estimated 300,000 shells an hour. Neither side was able to gain an advantage, and the losses in this one battle were staggering. 700,000 to 1 million. Verdun was recalled ever thereafter as a symbol of French resistance and valor. Subheaded, the Battle of the Somme, S-O-M-M-E. In 1916, the Western Allies mounted an offensive against the Germans in the north and the trenches there. That battle lasted from July to November, known as the Battle of the Somme. It involved 4 divisions, 600,000 men, 4,000 pieces of artillery. In the first day alone, the British Army suffered more than 57,000 casualties, including more than 19,000 dead. After 8 days of shelling, the British general ordered a land assault over the top, assuming that most of the Germans surely would have been killed. But they survived, many of them, survived the shelling, had time to organize machine gun defenses that killed 20,000 more men and wounded 40,000. Little was gained, and yet the British general ordered another assault, which also failed. American soldiers later did not think much of the British. In November of that year, the Allies announced that the Battle of the Somme was over. It had cost 130,000 British losses, 15,000 French, 23,000 Australians, 24,000 Canadians. German losses estimated at 160,000. The total advance paid all of that, 10,000. A German soldier in his diary describes the result of that battle. I want to read it to you. Quote, "This area, meaning where it was fought, was meadows and forest and cornfields just a short time ago. There is nothing left of it, nothing at all. Literally, not a blade of grass, not one tiny blade." I have several photographs taken at the time. Here's the first. Every millimeter of earth had been churned up and churned again, the trees uprooted and torn apart, the ground now sludge, the houses shot to pieces, the bricks crushed into powder, the railway tracks turned into spirals, hills flattened, everything turned to desert. There's another shot of it. And everything full of corpses that had been turned over 100 times. Whole lines of soldiers are lying in front of their positions. And our trenches are filled with corpses lying over each other in layers. One more shot. Germany finally realized the insanity of trying to fight on 2 fronts at the same time, against the Allies in the west and against Russia to the east. Furthermore, they realized that a greater problem would soon result when the United States declared war and joined the fray. So they decided to neutralize 2 enemies. And shortly thereafter, in April of 1917, the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, asked for a declaration of war, which was done. Well, the German effort to neutralize their enemies worked in part. It worked in the east. It did not work in the west. I'll tell you what they did. In Russia, there had been an admirer of Karl Marx. He had been banished from the country to Switzerland. This is the beginning of communism. So the Germans took Mr. Marx, funded him with a satchel full of money, and sent him back to Russia with the instructions, if he could, to foment a revolution against the Tsar, who was the German enemy to the east. It succeeded. That was the beginning of the Soviet Union. That took Russia out of the war. Now what to do in the West? Well, the Russians were aware that at the back of the United States was a lot of ill feeling in Mexico. Because Mexico, as the result of the war with Mexico, 1847, 48, 49, I think, Mexico had lost Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona, California. And so the Germans sent a secret telegram to Mexico saying, help us attack the Americans from the rear. Keep them busy so that they can't send soldiers, and when we win this war, you will get those states back. And you are well aware that there are elements in Mexico that still hope to do that. Well, the telegram sent to the Mexicans in code, fortunately was decoded by the British and published in American newspapers. And that finally turned the tide for war against Germany. So the next subheading I have is the United States in the war. Until 1917, when the war was 3 years old, the United States was little concerned about the fate of England and France. Well concerned, but not willing to do anything about it. They remained officially neutral. The conflict seemed far away, and many people felt it's none of our business. But in January of that year, the Germans expanded their use of submarines. And they knew that Americans were shipping food to England and sometimes disguising it in passenger ships, or so they thought. And so they sent a submarine to attack a famous vessel called the Lusitania. Read this. And they sunk it with the loss of 128 American citizens. Now, given the new German demand that such food shipments must stop, diplomatic relations between Germany and the United States were severed. And thereafter, several more American vessels were sunk. War now appeared absolutely necessary, and so military preparedness was begun. Then came the discovery that the Germans were trying to incite Mexico, and that finally tipped the balance. We must prepare for war. U.S. military leaders were very naive. They said that any new tools and training were not necessary for this war since, as they put it, our military is in fine shape. As you will see, not true. The Germans outnumbered the American army by 20 to 1. And it was soon realized that a draft would be necessary. In addition, the present troops were not trained in trench warfare. Our officers wanted to fight in the old way. They wanted to fight on horseback. Can you imagine what a machine gun nest would do to an advancing cavalry? Many weapons had to be supplied by the French. Poison gas was unknown, not one gas mask. Firearms were in limited numbers. Air warfare airplanes thought to be ineffective, and the Navy was undeveloped. So, military drill now to prepare the army was sometimes done with sticks for rifles, mud balls for grenades, and tree stumps mounted on wheels for cannon. You see the cannon there used for practice? A log, propped up on what we would call a sawhorse, I suppose. Training camps had to be established, in some cases cut out of thickets. Pup tents were used, and into each pup tent would be thrown a bale of straw for 4 soldiers to use for sleep. Under such conditions, it was thought that it would take a year before the army could become even marginally equipped and ready to ship to France. Meanwhile, the Germans hoped to win the war before all of that could take place. Now, military hardware had to be purchased from the French. Newly developed tanks, 235 of them, 200 million rounds of ammunition, 11 million artillery shells, 50,000 machine guns, 4,500 airplanes. Once they reached the front, food was in short supply. How do you supply all these troops? It didn't even arrive on time, and exploding shells often would hit the cooking lines. Beans were so poorly cooked that when they were served, they rattled in the pan. One soldier from Yancey County said he never would eat another bean as long as he lived because of hearing that rattling of the soup beans hitting the tray, and he didn't. Potatoes were served unpeeled. Horse meat was a staple, especially in Belgium. And food was so poor that it was generally called slum or slum gully. Nonetheless, the hungry soldiers were glad even to get that. Now, consider this for how American troops were clothed. Can you imagine, under battle conditions like you have seen, the following rations? Come rain or shine, heat or cold. A new slicker or overcoat every 5 months. One blanket, a flannel shirt or breeches every 2 months. A coat every 75 days. A pair of drawers every 34 days. Diarrhea or not. A pair of woolen socks every 23 days. A pair of shoes every 51 days. And many soldiers protested that they felt lucky to get even that. To pay for all this, the United States government launched a massive drive to sell war bonds. And women worked 11 hours a day in order to produce these supplies like knitting socks. Here is a bond poster. One like this, many like this, must have been shown in Bakersfield. Boy Scouts. And they sold war bonds and war stamps. I am sure that in trunks in this county, some of those could be found. I only see them in pictures. I've never seen the real thing. But if you find them and you want to donate them to the museum in Burnsville, I would be absolutely delighted. With this massive influx of troops, most of them under the command of a very experienced general called John Pershing, the Germans began to be pushed backward. General Pershing, who had been in previous wars, was promoted to the highest level of any American general. He's called General of the Armies. But before the Congress let that happen, they promoted George Washington also to the rank of General of the Armies because they said no one should ever outrank General Washington. So his rank was far higher than anyone such as Eisenhower or MacArthur in the Second World War. So the arrival of the Americans produced a number of furious battles with staggering casualties in the range of hundreds of thousands on both sides. I'm going to mention just two of them in conclusion. These helped bring the war to an end. Number one, on September the 2nd, 1918, see, the war is far along now, the German command ordered a withdrawal to a famous series of trenches that extended for hundreds of miles called the Hindenburg Line. And soldiers from this county were there. It stretched from the North Sea to the borders of Switzerland. And it consisted of 6 defensive lines, a zone 6,000 yards deep, nearly 3.5 miles. And its base contained replacements for rifles and machine guns at frequent intervals. Excuse me. The Allies began their attack on September the 29th with tanks and artillery shells. 1,600 big guns. One of the tank drivers was from Yancey County. He tried to cross a trench with his tank. It pitched into it and lodged. And the Germans gathered around it and began to hit it with machine gun fire. And he said it just sounded like beams popping against that tank all over the place. And they were pinned inside until relieved by American troops. After 4 days with support from artillery and tanks and planes, the Germans were forced to retreat with heavy losses. Here's the second famous battle, the Battle of Argonne Forest. Soldiers from this county were there. It was to the south of the Hindenburg Line in the Verdun sector. U.S. and French forces took part in this so-called Meuse-Argonne offensive, usually called the Battle of Argonne Forest. It took place from September 26th and lasted until the armistice was signed on November the 11th. It was the largest confrontation of the war, involving 1.2 million United States soldiers. When it was over, the United States had suffered 26,000 killed, 95,000 wounded, French casualties 70,000, German losses 100,000. The Battle of Argonne Forest has been called probably the bloodiest single battle in U.S. history. And several U.S. soldiers from Mitchell County lost their lives. Here is the great cemetery at Argonne Forest. Now, this is not how you were initially buried. Many soldiers were buried in the mud of battle and never recovered. Those that were recovered were put in a box and buried in a muddy cemetery. And it would be 2 or 3 years before they were exhumed. By then, nothing remained except a skeleton. So some soldiers were exhumed from here and sent by request to their family to the United States. I doubt if those caskets probably then were ever opened. If they were, you would only have been a skeleton. Cessation of hostilities took place at 11 a.m. November the 11th, 1918. That famous statement, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. It was officially designated an armistice, meaning that it was just a ceasefire. And so the celebration was initially called Armistice Day, but the title later changed to Veterans Day. But official terms for the treaty were not worked out until much later. In the United States, it was not ratified until 3 years later when War and Party was written. Local soldiers. In the Tolbert Valley where we lived, more than 900 were summoned on the first and by far the largest draft. Of these, as best I can determine, more than 700 actually were induced. From Avery County, 6 were killed in action, 2 died of wounds and disease claimed 3. From Yancey, 18 lost their lives. And I have not been able to find the statistics from Mitchell, but I have found at least 6 who were killed. In this volume that I'm doing, 800 pages will be devoted to the war itself, along the lines presented here. Then there will be sketches of the life and service of soldiers themselves. As I've told you, 400. And I'm thinking about stopping because to do them all will take me another 2 years. And I'm simply getting too old to spend that much time because World War II is waiting for me. Korea, Vietnam, the Gulf Wars, and other volumes that I would like to do before, as the old folks said, the fell monster gets me. You know the fell monster, right? That's when you take a dirt down. One of the list of soldiers that I have used is stitched into a quilt. You probably know about this, maybe not. In Burnsville, there was a physician named Burdette Robertson. I wouldn't be surprised if citizens of this county visited his office. His wife requested that he find soldiers, and he brought names to them, whether they served in camp, whether they served overseas, whether they had died, and all these were encoded on the quilt in different colors of thread. Here it is. This quilt hung in the American Legion Hall in Burnsville for a while, but the family began to fear that it would probably be lost, and so it was given to the North Carolina State Archives in Raleigh. Just to make sure all was in order, I went and asked to see the thing, and here it is. His daughter Marita had had it in Wilmington, and I went to see her, and she was kind enough to bring it out, put it on a bed, and let me photograph it. And when she came to the door, I was astonished. She was a woman in her 90s, and she had high makeup and hose and high heels. Not what you see in someone more than 90 every day. I was highly impressed. All right, I have a section on civilian activities which I will cover but briefly. The armistice in Burnsville was celebrated by hanging the Kaiser in effigy. There's a photograph of that. It's but there, I'm sorry. There you can see soldiers on the street, or rather citizens. The Kaiser is hanging up there, and people try to shoot it down. Until finally, one of them got it down with a shotgun blast. During this time, there was rationing. Here is an illustration of a ration poster for sugar. You know, I saw an article in the newspaper, I think the Tri-County News, that said Mr. McQueen's store in Switzerland still had, this was in the 40s, still had a ration poster like this. They said they gave it to the draft board for World War II. I tried to find it. It's gone forever. There was other kind of ration. Here is one about multiple ways to use eggs in your cooking. There was a statement at the time that went like this: meatless Tuesdays, wheatless Wednesdays, guestless Sundays. And the government official was appointed to oversee this kind of food, so there would be more that shipped to soldiers. The government official appointed to do that was named Herbert Hoover. Later to be President of the United States, and this whole effort came to be called hoovering. Any of you ever hear your parents talk about hoovering? Yeah. Probably not. Propaganda. People were appointed in each county to give speeches in churches and public schools and movie theaters. Posters were displayed. There were anti-German pamphlets and films. Hollywood produced such films as The Kaiser, the Beast of Berlin. And some of you may remember a comic strip called Mutt and Jeff. Anybody remember Mutt and Jeff? Okay. A few of us who are older, you see, I'm so old the Dead Sea hasn't even gotten sick yet. So I remember that. Mutt and Jeff at the front was a little pamphlet produced. Here is the poster for The Beast of Berlin. Probably there was one or two of these flying around Bakersfield. There were protective leagues to assist the FBI by identifying any war organizations and rounding up grave dodgers. There were a number of those. Some 4,000, I think, in North Carolina. One story I've been told is that a lot of soldiers reached the crest of the mountain out of the pass, slowed down, and several dozen soldiers jumped out. They could have been arrested by the military. The governor of North Carolina came to Mitchell County, met with the families of deserters, and pled with them to call their sons in because he said, you don't want your sons to be hunted for the rest of their life and disgraced. And you'll be happy to know that all those deserters from Mitchell County turned themselves in and served their time in the military. In Yancey County, good old Walt Edwards did not want to serve, so he took his rifle, told his family, I'm going rabbit hunting. And I might get injured, so if you hear a gunshot, you come looking for me. Sure enough, they heard one and found him, and he shot his toe off. Said it was an accident in rabbit hunting. So the steps were taken to avoid those terrible things that you saw in the pictures. I have another section called The War and Language. little expressions that have come into English as the result of that war. I'll just be very selective and brief. Tank. Over the top. To this day, we talk about some struggle and say, you know, that's a little over the top. A bad minute, just a bad minute, we might say. The British trained their soldiers to fire their rifle at the rate of 15 rounds a minute. That was called a bad minute. Air raid shelter, dugout, those little trenches with their cubbies on the side. Here are some descriptions that soldiers gave to their little dugout. The Rat's Retreat, or Vermin Villa. Basket case. Soldiers were wounded in the trenches and carried to the rear on a barrel or a basket. Subsequently, he might be called a basket case. Cooties. Everyone knows that one, I think. Shell shocked. Pushing up daisies. This was one of a number of euphemisms that soldiers and medical staff used to avoid blunt language like dead. I don't know if daisies grew in the cemetery areas as did poppies or not. Sniper. Next little topic, popular music. Music has always played a role in warfare to cause patriotism in the home. When Johnny comes marching home, the national anthem, Dixie. During World War I, marching bands and patriotic singing services were encouraged in every county. They took place here. They were called a Liberty Chorus. And some of the songs produced you still know. One is Over There. George Cohen got a Congressional Medal of Honor for writing that thing, remember? Over there, send the word over there, that the Yanks are coming. So prepare, say a prayer, send the word to beware. We'll be over. We're coming over. And we won't come back till it's over there. How about, how are you going to keep them down on the farm? Anyone remember that? How are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? They'll never want to see a regular plow. And who the deuce can party who a cow? How are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? My favorite variation of that goes, how are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen the farm? People want usually to get away from it. One last one, and my wife warned me not to do this. There's a song, it's a long, long way to Tipperary. Tipperary was a village in Ireland. Remember how that partly goes? It's a long way to Tipperary, it's a long way to go. It's a long way to Tipperary to the sweetest girl I know. And on and on. Well, the American soldiers arranged a little variation. Because they became friends with French girls. And the French were a little more avant-garde about things than American cowboys were back home. One soldier from Yancey said, he liked German girls just fine. He didn't like French women. So here is part of how that song in its parody goes. That's the wrong way to tickle Marie. And they didn't mean tickle her in the ribs like that. It probably referred to sexual pleasure. That's the wrong way to tickle Marie, meaning the way we've always done it. That's the wrong way to kiss. Don't you know that over here, lad, they like it better like this? Hooray for France! Goodbye to England. We didn't know how to tickle Marie, but now we learn how. Finally, a little poem. I found it in the trunk of a World War I soldier from Yancey. I'll read it to you while you can see it over there. It's called The Kaiser Talks to Hell. The Kaiser called the devil up on the telephone one day, and the girl accepted or listened to all they had to say. Hello, she heard the Kaiser's voice. Is old man Satan home? Just tell him that it's Kaiser Bill that wants him on the phone. The devil said, hello to Bill. And Bill said, how are you? I'm running here on hell on earth, so tell me what to do. What can I do? The devil said, my dear old Kaiser Bill. If there's a thing that I can do to help you, I sure will. The pastor said, now listen. Now I'll try to tell the way that I'm running things on earth of modern health. My army went through Belgium, shooting women and children down. They tore up all our country and blew up all our towns. My zips dropped bombs on them. Zip is a zeppelin. It's a blimp, a dirigible, like the Goodyear. Those things made it to England to drop bombs after the war. My zips dropped bombs on cities, killing old and young alike. And those the zeppelins didn't get, we took them out unharmed. I started out for Paris with the aid of poison gas, but the Belgians, darn them, stopped us and would not let us pass. My submarines are devils. You should see them fight. They go sneaking through the sea and sink a ship at sight. I was running things to suit me until a year or so ago when a man called Woodrow Wilson wrote me to go more slow. He said to me, "Dear William, we don't want to make you sore, but be sure to tell your U-boats to sink our ships no more." U-boats mean something like Übersee, undersea. We have told you for the last time, said President Wilson, so, dear Bill, it's up to you. And if you do not stop it, you've got to fight us too. I did not listen to him. He's coming after me. He's bringing Yankee soldiers from their homes beyond the sea. So that's why I've called you, Satan, to seek advice from you. I knew that you could tell me just what I ought to do. Satan said, "My dear old Pastor William, there's not very much for me to tell, for the Yankees will make it harder than I can for you in hell. I've been a mean old devil, but not half as mean as you. And the minute that you get here, I will give my job to you. I'll be ready for your coming. I'll keep the fires all bright. And I'll have your room all ready when those Yanks begin to fight. For the boys in blue will get you." And most of the photographs that you've seen of American soldiers, they have on a winter uniform that's bright. But also blue bars. "For the boys in blue will get you. I have nothing more to tell. Hang up the phone and get your hat and meet me here in hell." And that's it. I'm sorry to have kept you so long, but we won't do this again, I think, before next week. Thank you for being here. Are there things about which you want to talk, or have you had enough and want to get where it's probably cooler outside? Well, as I sometimes say to my students, the silent have it, do they? And you ready? Hearing no objection, thank you, we're finished.
Hey, Lloyd, I have a question actually.
Oh, we do, thank
In
you.
all the years that I taught about the 241, I kept coming up differing opinions on where the term Doughboy came from. What have you concluded about that?
Dover?
Doughboy.
Doughboy, old word. There's half a dozen suggestions about that.
Yeah, I've seen many of them, and none of them conclusive, so
Well, somewhere in the big notebook that I do not have here, I've listed all of those. But to tell you the truth, after 1,500 pages, I've forgotten one I think is right, or even any of them. But that's what the
Method to agree, I think.
They call it doughboys.
that's just curious. If you can place something definitive.
I'm sorry about that. I'm old and senile. I did not.
Not one. Well, thank you everybody for coming out. I'm sorry, some question.
We have another.
One eating called Off the Farm, and that originated with the one called a soldier who was killed in action. It's in his insurance money home, and in many cases, it actually takes more than on the farm. Sometimes they say that the soldier off the farm.
That makes very good sense. It's an idiom that I had not heard explained in that way, so I thank you. There were people who used the insurance premium to build things. If you know where Green Mountain is, do you? John West Hall's store is on the left, the river is on the right. Just beyond the store, there's a church. It's Presbyterian. Charles Howell was killed in France. His insurance money was used to build that church. There must have been other buildings. Anything else?
Mention the notebooks.
I'm sorry?
Notebooks.
Yes, the notebooks are here. You can look at them. I spent a lot of time indexing those Westwoods. All 400 soldiers that I have thus far discussed are indexed in the first few pages, and you can just look up a name, find the soldier number, and turn to it, and see what I have to say. Yes, ma'am?
My dad was in World War I, so this is
Well, I don't remember, Maxine, whether he has discussed it or not. I think he is, based on the material you sent. Look him up and see how I did. And I don't know if you give me a picture of him or not, but if you did, it's in there. Okay?